which was established from 1st of July 2019. It is an advisory, non-departmental public body which provides independent advice and scrutiny to Scottish ministers on poverty and inequality. Enjoy the show.
Hi, good day. My name's Bill Scott. I'm the chair of the Poverty and Inequality Commission for Scotland, and I'd like to thank the organisers of the Year One conference for the invitation to speak to you all. I think it's a great initiative promoting equality and diversity in our communities, and really, really happy to be able to spend some time with you, even if it's remotely. Before going on, I'm going to share a screen with you so you can see some slides to tell you a wee bit more about the Poverty and Inequality Commission and what we do. So just bear with me for a second and I'll share the screen with you. Right. So, who are the Poverty Commission and what do we do? Well, the Commission was set up by the Child Poverty Scotland Act 2017. So we were set up by law, and that we've got three things that we have to do according to the Child Poverty Act. The first one is to check whether the Scottish Government is actually meeting its targets to reduce child poverty in Scotland. The second thing we do is we can provide advice to ministers in the Scottish Government on how best to reduce poverty. And the third thing we can do is we can advocate more widely in Scottish society for poverty and inequality to be reduced. So all three of those things are very, very important to us. We try and do all three fairly constantly. Once a year, though, we actually get to check on whether there's progress being made towards meeting the child poverty targets. So who are we? Well, the Commission is 9 members, and if you count well, you'll see there are only 8 in the photograph before you. That's because one of the members couldn't be there that day. That's Shona Stevens. She's the Chief Executive of Queen's Cross Housing Association in Glasgow. But the other people there are all the other members of the Commission. And we're a mix of people with both lived experience of poverty and campaigners against poverty and researchers on poverty. And we include amongst our members a refugee, a wheelchair user, and a single parent. And by no means is that the only lived experience there, but I think it's just to give you an idea of the diversity of the people that are involved in the Commission, and that we're not all just people that are paid to think about poverty. There are people there with real lived experience. They've directly experienced poverty, and they bring that into the discussions in the Commission to make sure that what we are saying fits with the experience that they've had in their lives. So the child poverty targets are that by 2030, in 10 years' time, that there should be less than 1 in 10 Scottish children living in poverty, and that less than 1 in 20 should be living in persistent poverty, where they're living in poverty for 3 years out of the last 4. But we've got a long way to go before achieving that, because currently in Scotland, 1 in 4 children are living in poverty, and 1 in 6 children are living in persistent poverty. Persistent poverty, obviously, really, really bad for children's development, cuts off their life chances, and can actually reduce their life expectancy. So we want to see both of those targets being met in the next 10 years. And we're doing everything to try and convince government that they need to put more measures in place to make sure that we actually make progress towards the targets that they've set for themselves, and which were supported unanimously. Every single MSP in the Scottish Parliament voted for these targets to be met by 2030. So how do we go about our work? Well, we've set principles for ourselves, and I hope we live up to those principles. The first principle is to be courageous and honest, and that is to say what is right and not necessarily what is easiest. That means that we sometimes, in speaking to government, are being very frank and very honest, that they might not be doing everything they can to reduce poverty. But, that's as it should be, because we want to speak up for those that don't have a lot of voice in government usually, and that's people that are living on a low income. The second thing is that we want to be listening and accessible. So we want to be accessible to everybody living in poverty, including disabled people, black and minority ethnic people, single parents, workers on 0 hours contracts, etc. Everybody with a direct lived experience of poverty and inequality, we want to hear from them. We want to hear what they've got to say, to listen to them, and to take it on board before we give advice or make recommendations to government. This is a really important thing as well. We want to treat everybody with dignity and respect, but not just us who wants to see to be treating people with dignity and respect. We want to see all a society treating everybody that lives in society with dignity and respect, because again, we know that the stigma that's there with poverty can mean that people aren't listened to, that they're not treated with respect, and their opinions are dismissed, when actually they are the real experts about their own lives. And we want to be vocal and amplify the voices of those who are too seldom heard. And again, that includes yourselves and many others in society who live in a low income. It's often the voices of the powerful and the well-off that are heard loudest. We want to be a means of making your voices louder and taking them to government, and making sure that we include you often when we're speaking to government, so that they can hear directly from you. And the final principle is one that you might be very familiar with in terms of social care, but this is about how we want to go about our work. We want to be person-centred, and that is to keep people and their lives and their potential in their lives and their individuality at the centre of everything we do. And that means really, really thinking about what poverty means to the individuals that it affects, because it affects people differently. It doesn't affect everybody in the same way. Some people, it affects their physical health, their mental health, it affects their ability to put food on the table for their children, etc. In some people's cases, it's caused by the fact that they're a disabled person, or that they're from a black and minority ethnic community. Discrimination plays a big part in who ends up living in poverty. So we want to take all of that into account when we do our work and when we speak to government. So again, we try and involve all of those groups and individuals in our ongoing work. So what have we been doing over the last few months? Well, we've been very, very busy. The COVID-19 emergency, the pandemic that we've all been facing, has caused real problems in Scottish society. I probably don't need to tell you that, because many of you will have experienced some of those problems. So we've been working with people, with local community groups, trying to gather evidence on how the pandemic has been affecting their lives. And we've, for example, we did work with local community groups about how they were getting food to people during the lockdown. And we know there were real problems that many disabled people faced, older people faced, and actually just getting access to food. So we've given the government advice about that. Then there's also been problems that many people on low incomes have faced in accessing funding from the Scottish Welfare Fund, which can provide benefit payments to you when you're in a real crisis situation, or where you're setting up house or you're moving house. So there's been real difficulties with that, and not all the money that the Scottish Government has given to local authorities to give out through the Scottish Welfare Fund has been used, and we want to know why that's happened. And again, we've spoken to people at the really sharp end of that who have made applications for money and then not got any. We wanted to find out why that had happened. Other people have never even heard of the fund, and that means, of course, that they don't know to apply for it, and they had to rely on charity for help instead. So again, we've just given advice to Scottish Government about what we think they need to do to promote the fund, to make sure people know about it, how to make it more accessible, because in many cases people had to make applications online, and lots of disabled people and older people and people on low incomes, the very people that really need that fund, they couldn't access it because they don't have access to the internet. So we want to make sure there's more than one way that you can apply for money from the fund. And just a week ago, for myself, that is a wee bit longer when you're hearing this, I and the Children's Commissioner sent a joint letter to the Cabinet Secretary for Communities asking that they provide more money to families with children in the next few months. We know that the Scottish Child Payment is going to be introduced and start making payments in February of next year, but that's 6 months away, very nearly. And in that time, there's a lot of children who could be going hungry because their parents don't have enough money to live on. So we've urged government to try and come up with a way to get money into the pockets of the parents in those families so that they can afford to heat their homes, put food on the table for their children, etc. So myself and the Children's Commissioner joined forces to ask the government to do that. And we've not had a response so far. We hope to in the near future. And I hope the government will hear what we've got to say, because there are many thousands of children who could suffer, and parents who could suffer, if there's no action taken to help them. So I've told you about the principles of our work, and I've told you what we've been doing lately, but we've made one thing our number one priority in how we go about our work, and that's to involve people with lived experience in our work. We really need to hear what you would like us to do, the difficulties you're facing because you haven't got enough money to live on, and what your ideas are about how to go about tackling poverty. Because again, people can have really good ideas, but when they actually put them into practice, they find they don't work for the people that are actually living on a low income, that are living in poverty. That's why we need to ask the people that are living in poverty what works for them. Because as I said before, you're the real experts in your own lives. So there will be opportunities coming up over the next few months for people outside the Commission, not members of the Commission itself, to get involved in our work. And we'll pass on those details to the conference organisers once we've got them ourselves. Because we want to set up a group of people with lived experience of poverty who can advise us on what works and what doesn't work for them, about the difficulties that they're having at the current time because of the pandemic and before the pandemic. Difficulties people might have in finding a job, difficulties people might have in just getting the support that they need to have an ordinary life. So we want you to get involved in our work, and we want to hear from you. So look out for those details that we pass on to the conference organisers. And if you want to be involved, we really want to hear from you. Come forward, volunteer to be a part of that group. It wouldn't be too large, probably only about 30 or 40 people will be involved. But the more people that come forward, hopefully the more representative we can make that group of the people that live in Scotland on a low income. And we know that that includes some of you who are going to be attending this conference online. So we really do want to hear from you. And I think that's really all I've got to say just now. It's thanks again for the opportunity to speak to you. I really do hope that we can all work together in the future, and that the Poverty Commission will become maybe better known to you, and that you might become part of the work that we do, even if you're not involved in that relatively small group that we're setting up. We'll be going out and wanting to hear from local communities. If you hear about meetings that we're organising in your area, or a visit that we're making to your area, and you live there, come along and see us. Be a part of what we do. We can all work together to make Scotland a country with far less children living in poverty, far fewer adults living in poverty, but we can only do it with your help and support. We can't do it on our own. Doesn't matter how influential the people in the Commission are. At the end of the day, it's really up to all the people that live in Scotland to work together to reduce poverty. And I hope that we can count on your support in doing that. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you have a great conference and that everything goes well. And I hope for the future that it's a better one for all of us. Thanks very much.